in the leaf pages. So the grading has been adjusted. Some people got higher grades, some people lower grades because of that. But I had previously asked the question with the negativity reversed and kept the old wrong answer, so it's now been fixed. The grades were unmuted a little while ago, and I'll be giving out the exams in the last 10 minutes of this class. There is a small curve, 0.9x plus 11. The grade that appears on Canvas is the uncurved grade, same thing I did in 180. So as an example, if you got an 80 on the midterm, the 80 is going to get mapped to 0.9 times 80, which is 72 plus 11, so that gets mapped to an 83. After the curve, the median grade in the course was 86.6. The mean was also 86, which I didn't post, but I'll let you know about. And if you end up having questions about things on the exam, and I'm sure that there will be various questions, please speak to Saloni and Lisa. So getting back into this lecture about the optimizer and dealing with a slide where there was a bug that I fixed. The bug, I ended up changing the slide to use my, better notation where I refer to, pages with a subscript and tuples with a subscript. But on the version of the slide that I had up before, and which I showed you last time, I had something where it just had pages of I and it didn't have the tuple subar, so that's in there. So the cost of, if you're counting page accesses, assuming nothing is actually buffered, using a non-clustered index to match one or more selects, it's going to be well, if you did a complete scan using the index, you have to look at all the pages in the index, meaning the leaf pages in the index. And then for any one of the tuples you get to, if we assume that the tuple is not inside the buffer, then it's going to take a disk access to get that tuple unless you do the sort, and we're not showing you with the sort. So per the correction from last time, the correct thing should be pages sub I plus tuple sub R, because for if you're using the non-clustered index without sorting, you're going to have to touch all the leaf pages of the index and then get all the tuples. Now that would be true if you're using the non-clustered index to get all the tuples, which by the way would be a dumb thing to do. You're much better off using just a straight scan, just looking through all the pages of R, which is going to be a lot better. But if you're doing this for all, then if you have a reduction factor of the matching selects, you multiply that by the product, assuming independence, that you have for the reduction factors, and that's going to be the cost, because, basically, if you only have to touch, 1/1000th of the tuples, then it's going to be 1/1000th of this. And of course, this is typically a high cost. I will remind you for the 30th time that typically these days, a lot of stuff is going to be sitting inside memory. You're not actually going to have to go out and do all these disk searches. But the comparison thing for doing this with the CPU cost, which I'm always tempted to switch this lecture to, ends up being a lot more complicated. But this way you get the general idea of what it's like if you have to go out to disk or SSD. But again, these days, you really want to throw assumptions that most things are going to be sitting inside memory. Then with that fix, and this slide was correct last time, and it uses the formula that I now have correctly on the previous slide. In the case of the unclustered index, if you have an index on the ratings column, then what you're going to do, assuming that every rating is 1/10 of the tuples, or 1 over the number of keys in the value, if you assume uniformity. So if there are 10 values, it would give you 1/10. If there are 50 values, it would give you 1/50th. So you're going to have the reduction factor, which is 1/10, 1/50th, whatever it is, times our formula with pages sub I plus tuple sub R, and there will be 50 pages with no free space inside the index, 40,000 tuples inside sailors in our assumption. So it's going to be 1/1000th of 40,050, which would be 4,005. So that would be what the value is. And if you have the index on SAD, then you don't have any matching predicates. And so what you'd have to be able to do is you can go ahead and use 3 paths to be able to do it. If you had a clustered index on SID, then the cost per the formula on the other page is going to be 50 plus 500. That's the index pages plus the data pages to be able to retrieve it. With an unclustered index, it would be this thing with the 50 plus 40,000. And of course, if you just do a straight file scan, it'll just be 500, which is even better than with a clustered index if you want to be able to retrieve everything. Since you don't have any predicates on SID, you are going to have to get all the tuples. So never forget about file scan. And again, to re-emphasize, file scan used to be regarded as, ha, 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 yeah, you can do it, why would you ever want to? File scans are so fast and parallel these days, and we'll get to this when I talk about parallelism later, that file scan is used a whole lot more than it was before. In part, by the way, because of NUMA, because file scan really takes advantage of this L1, L2 kind of stuff incredibly because of the way hardware works. And again, we'll talk about this later in the term. So doing the file scan ain't bad. And, you know, it seriously gets considered. Okay. And now, we've talked about what happens when you have a single table. Believe it or not, there are some queries that have multiple tables in them. You may have seen them, you may have written them. Again, as the number of relations increases, the number of plans you have to consider goes up higher and higher. Now, System R, which again was the first system with an optimizer, the optimizer on Ingress, which was the system that created at Berkeley, wasn't very good in its early days. It got better based on ideas from the System R optimizer. What the heck? Oracle's original optimizer was a rule-based optimizer that basically said, anytime there was a clustered index, I'll use the clustered index whether it reduces the cost or not. Optimizers have gotten a lot better. And System R made what now would be regarded as a stupid assumption. And I'll talk about what that stupid assumption means, and then I'll talk about why it's stupid now. And the assumption is that you only want to go ahead and use left deep trees. What does a left deep tree mean? You get to a first table. And now based on something where you have a join predicate where there's another table, because we want to avoid Cartesian products as much as possible, then we'll take the tuples as they come out of table A and we'll join them together with B. And then we'll get the result AB. And then we'll take the results of A join B with whatever predicates can be applied to A, B, or both of them. And we'll take results as they come in and we'll pipeline them into joining with C. And then we'll take the results of that and we'll pipeline them joining with D. And the idea, in part because it was efficient at the time, in part because it was too complicated to be able to consider all plans, and in part because you don't have the massive parallelism that you have these days. The left deep plan wasn't a bad thing to consider at that time. And so let's look at some examples over here. So again, this allows us to pipeline so that you can take things that come out as tuples or batches of tuples come out from a partial thing. You can use it at the next step. And so this is not a left deep plan because you have to do the A join B. You start off on the left, you get C, that's looking good, but you have to get the result of A join B, and that's not a left deep plan, so that is not correct. This is not a left deep plan either. Both of these, particularly the one on the left, are what are referred to as bushy joins. And again, you can see it looks like a bush, a shrub, a tree, pick your favorite, mechanical term with respect to it, but it's more balanced, out about what's going on. You don't keep going from left up the tree, whereas the one in the middle, whereas the one in the middle is left deep. So you take A, and as you get tuples from A, maybe you're accessing A via some index on just tuples of A. Maybe you're using a join predicate to be able, as you have a tuple from A, you're going to get the matching tuples from B. And maybe now you're going to use C, and you have some predicates that involve both A and B that allow you only to get relevant C tuples. And then you get ABC, and you're going to add, and you're going to get D. And the idea is that because excessively, in part because writing temporaries out was more expensive then with disk, and there was smaller memory, and you didn't have SSD or non-volatile RAM. Things were expensive, and so pipelining meant that you could take the results that you got them and move them up to the next step, and do multiple steps perhaps in parallel. The pipelining avoids having to write intermediate results, but you can't always avoid intermediate results. And one reason why is on the slide, and maybe you can think of some other reasons. One reason you can't avoid intermediate results is if I'm going to do a sort merge, I can't sort until I have the full result. I mean, I could sort half of it, but that's not going to really help me that much. I mean, I can't finish until I have the full stuff that I need to sort. And in many plans, a group by is going to require that I have the full stuff. So if I'm doing a group by where I'm adding things up, a group by with a sum, I can maybe start forming my groups as I go, but I can't do the addition until I have the entire group. So certain operations block the pipeline. You can do a little bit of work getting started, but you can't finish the work until you have the entire results. But pipelining was a nice thing that System1 did. The two trees that have this, do not enter symbol on top of them, they are both plans that just about every optimizer will consider now. The number of different plans that have to be considered is ridiculously huge when you consider these things, even when you have five-way joins. But remember, you have all the different join orders to think about. What order do I access my tables? And now I can access them in parallel. I can do something like this, where I do A join B, C join D, and then I join the results together. And I have all these different join methods to consider, and I have all these different access paths to consider. The set of plans to consider ends up being huge, but the benefit you get from picking up a good plan ends up being huge. And maybe you can figure out a good plan and then keep using it and using it and using it. I'll mention this thing to you. What a lot of systems do is, I'll give you two ways, there's more than two, of doing optimization. One way is figure out a good plan and store it inside the database. And every time I execute the query, I'm going to use that good plan. So I won't have to optimize more than once. If my plan depends on an index that no longer exists, then I'll optimize again because I can't use that old plan because the index no longer exists. Some also might say, if I've created some new indexes, maybe I'll optimize again to see if the new indexes make things better. But it could be, as long as the plan still works, I go along and use it. Another approach that gets used is there's a plan cache that is used inside the system. Oracle used that for a long time and probably still does. What do I mean by a plan cache? I have a bunch of queries that I've optimized, 10,000 queries, 100 queries, whatever it is, some number of queries. Let's just say 1,000. 1,000 queries that I've optimized recently. And basically, I'll use those plans again and again and again. I start off with an empty plan cache when I start running, but I'll keep the 1,000 most recently used, query plans, and I'll keep those around. And then the same query comes in, I'll use hashing to figure out I can still use that plan. It's still a good plan to use. I'll just go ahead and I'll use it. And if a new query comes in that I don't have stored in my plan cache, then I'll optimize it, and somebody's going to get thrown out of my plan cache. So even if I optimize it and I throw it out of the plan cache, I may have to go ahead and do it again. So basically, the one idea is just store the thing in the database and keep using it again and again and again. And a more reasonable thing these days is to have a plan cache and keep a bunch of things around that are often used and use them. And as with so much of this stuff, there are thousands of variations that people have done over the years. And so don't be limited by things that I tell you that are old or even new. There are all kinds of different ways of playing with this that are useful. Questions? Okay, so how do you go about dealing with your lefty plants? And again, it's more complicated when you have bushy joins and so on that are going on. So basically what happens is that you have to deal with what's the order in which the relations are accessed, because it's all going to be start with a relation, then get the next, then get the next, then get the next, and pipeline as long as you can, as long as you don't have a problem with the pipelining. But you do have to figure out how you access the tables, as well as the order in which they're put together, and where there are joins, what method you use to do the join. Will you ever do a Cartesian product? Yeah, if you don't have any choice. I do A join B, and now there are no predicates on the remaining C, D, E relations between A, B, and the other. So I'll consider having to do a Cartesian product because I don't have a choice. It doesn't happen that often, can and does happen, rarely, but very rarely. So basically what happens is there are n stages in trying to do an n-table query. First stage, here we're starting counting at 1, not counting at 0. Stage 1, look at the best relation plan for each of your relations. You've got n relations, find the best way of accessing each relation as the first relation. There may be a hash that allows me to get to this table. There may be a B-tree index, and there's always file scan. So there may be several different ways of getting to each of the tables. Consider each one of them and keep the best one for each table. The best way of getting to A, the best way of getting to B, the best way of getting to C, the best way of getting to D, the best way of getting to E. Each one of them. You start to see where this gets exponential quickly. I mean, we're getting factorial here. Now, what we'll do is we'll take, now that we've got each single relation query, take all the other relations that are in the query, and some queries may involve the same table more than once, in which case you have to consider that too. So when a relation appears more than once, it's as if it's another relation for purposes of doing this calculation. So I'll take, A, and I'll try it with B, adding B, AB, and then A C, A D, A E. I'll try all the ways of taking my best plan of getting A, and then the best way of adding the next relation. So there are many ways of getting A and then adding B. And I'll pick the best overall way, the cost of getting A and then the cost of joining it with B. Cartesian product only when necessary. So now I have the cost of getting A and then getting AB. Okay, and I'll consider all the different possibilities of doing it. I'll consider AB, AC, AD, AE, as long as I'm avoiding Cartesian product. And I'll look at BA, which is different than AB. Because I got B first, and then I'm joining it with A. So I'll consider BA, BC, BD, BE. And here's what's fun. I will keep around a value for getting A and B together. And I don't care whether it was AB or BA. Hey, it's the same darn result. I'm applying all the predicates can be applied to A and B, or both of them. And I've got the result with A, B, and all the predicates that are just on A and B. And it doesn't matter whether I got it versus via A, B, or BA. I've got the results of doing A and B together. It doesn't matter whether I have A, B, or BA with all the predicates on A, B, and maybe getting rid of extraneous columns as well. I will keep the best way of getting ABC, whether it's ABC or ACB or BCA or BAC or CBA or CAB. I think I got all 6 of them differently. Hard to do. Try it yourself. Try it at home. I keep all the ways of getting each 3-way thing, and I don't care how I got it. What I have is a result of putting together ABC with all the predicates on A, B, C, or combinations of ABC. No D or E yet. And I will take my best way of adding ABC, and I'll consider what happens when I throw in D. And I'll consider what happens when I throw in E. And when I get the best way of taking ABC and throwing in E, I have ABCE, and again, my best way of having ABCE, I don't care what order the tables are added. I have the best way of getting ABCE with all the predicates on ABC in there, regardless of how I go about getting them. So in general, at stage n, I take the best way of getting the n-1 tables and then adding one more. But I don't have to keep it for all the permutations. For ABCE, I don't care how I got ABCE. I don't care how I got ABC. I have ABCE with all the predicates on ABCE applied, and now I see about what happens when I add D. So here's now the little lie that I told. Questions on what I just said before I tell you the little lie. System R keeps the cheapest plan overall, e.g. for ABCE, regardless of how it got ABCE. But it keeps something else. And this is perhaps the first technical use you've seen of the word interesting. little by little, every word in the English language gets given a technical term. In System R, and this goes back to the Pat Selinger 1979 paper on the optimizer, it keeps the best way of getting ABCE, and also it keeps interesting ways of getting ABCE. So you would say, what does interesting mean? Next slide. Okay. Interesting orders of tables. A data order, meaning, you know, the order in which the result is in. It's not the order in which I get ABCE. It's the order in which the data is sorted. Because, you know, some of the access methods give me data sorted. Some of them are, you know, arbitrary orders. But for example, if I do a sort merge, my data is ordered by the column that I did the sort merge on, right? That's how I do it. If I access via an index, then if I'm accessing via the index and, you know, I don't, you know, resort by page ID, I get my data in the order that the index came in. The data is ordered by the way that I got the data using the index. If I'm using an index on SID, my data is going to be sorted by SID. If I'm using an index on rating, my data is going to be ordered by rating. So basically, an interesting order has to do with what column or columns is the data sorted by. It's not how I got the data. I will keep the cheapest way of getting ABCE, and I'll also keep around ways of getting ABCE that have interesting sort orders for the data. And I have to tell you a little more about what interesting means. Suppose that I have my cheapest plan to get ABCE, and that costs 500. And I have another way where my data is sorted by rating, and it costs 600. You could say, well, throw away the 600 and just keep the one that's 500. Because regardless how I got ABCE, I got ABCE. But System R and other systems too will keep around the 600, even though it's more expensive, because it may save work later. It may be that the order in which the data appears, that is the order in which the data is sorted when I got ABCE via the cost 600 plan, will help me save work later. For example, it's ordered by a joint attribute. Well, if it's ordered by a joint attribute and I decide I want to use a sort merge algorithm, I won't have to sort the data because it's already sorted by the attribute that I want to be able to use. Or it could be a group by attribute. If the data is already sorted by rating and I have a group by rating, having it already ordered by rating will save me doing work later using sorting or hashing. Same thing with respect to a distinct. Distinct, it'll be easier for me to get rid of some stuff if it's already sorted by the distinct attributes. And with an order by, obviously, if I can avoid doing the sorting to do the order by, because things are coming up in the right order, then that's cheaper. So the goal is to prune, but not get rid of something that will be the cheapest overall. And even though that ABCE plan that's sorted by rating is more expensive than the cost 500 plan that wasn't sorted by rating, it may save me work later. So those interesting plans are kept around. So the cheapest plan, only the cheapest plan for each interesting order is kept. You don't keep around 5 plans for an interesting order. What's the point? You keep the cheapest plan for each interesting order, okay? And you also keep the cheapest uninteresting order. But you know what? If the cheapest interesting order is better than the cheapest uninteresting order, you don't keep the cheapest uninteresting order. So if the cheapest interesting order is 1,000 and the cheapest uninteresting order is 1,500, there's no point in keeping the interesting. Being interesting never hurts. Allows you to have more conversations, parties, you know, all the rest of that stuff. So being interesting never hurts. There's no point in keeping an uninteresting plan if an interesting plan is better. No, okay. So again, to emphasize the points here, when I look at getting ABC, I don't care how I got ABC. All that I want is to keep the cheapest plan for getting ABC, whether it was any of the 6 permutations of how I got them. Assuming that, again, we're doing the left-leaning plans. But I not only keep the cheapest uninteresting plan, I also keep interesting plans because that may save me work later. Maybe. Only if it really potentially does save me work later do I keep it. If I have a result that's sorted by a column that's not going to help me later, there's no point in keeping it around. It sounds interesting, but it's not going to help. Interesting and useless isn't really interesting. It's only if it's going to help. No, this is not a sociology class. Okay, so basically, we avoid Cartesian products. We always pick a next table based on there being a join predicate with the next. Again, if there's ABC and there's at least one predicate with E, I'll try adding E next. I won't try adding D if there's no predicate involving any of A, B, C, and D, except if I have no choice. If the only way I can move forward is by taking a Cartesian product, then I'll do a Cartesian product. If ABC has no predicates with either D and E, then I'll have to go ahead and try D and E as it's used up. So avoid Cartesian product whenever possible. You know, and as Einstein said, everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. Avoid Cartesian product whenever possible, and when it's impossible, you still have to execute the query. Okay? And things like order by, group by, and aggregates are generally handled within a query block at the end of it, putting the results together. It's not always true anymore, but you typically in system R you would leave them for last. Things can be done in the middle sometimes. You know, basically, how do you do a group by? Well, if you've got an interesting order that helps you with the group by, terrific. But you may have to go ahead and use hashing, say, which is more commonly used in sorting, to be able to put the things that are in the groups and aggregate them together or put together. Or order by can't be done with hashing. Order by really does require sorting. And this is still a huge problem. Again, when I told you that there was an 18-way join that I've seen with a lot of, you know, left outer joins in it, or maybe it was right outer joins, I forget. It was just one of them, curiously enough. But anyway, I mean, this is a huge kind of problem in terms of the number of different things to consider. It's really, really huge. And now, here's a very important property that maybe some people were thinking about, but nobody asked me about. I want to do cost estimation, and I said I will keep the cheapest way that I can get ABC, regardless of how I got it. What's the cost of getting ABC? Well, I'm going to figure out what the cost is, but the formula that I use to get the cost for getting ABC, as you'll soon see, is going to be the same whether I did ABC or CAB or CBA or BCA or BAC, which again I think is all 6. And the formula was defined that way so you don't have costing cheating based on what the order of the tables is, because you want to have a formula, basically the result of getting ABC, with all the predicates on ABC applied, you want to have an independent path. You want to be able to get an answer that's the same regardless of how you got it, as to what the cost is and also what the size is. Why do we need the size? Because the size of ABC is going to affect how expensive it is to then do the join with E. So the formulas that System R used and most other systems use to figure out cost and size are going to be independent of the path that you got to get there. It's going to depend only on what you have, what you computed, not how you got to it. Now, by the way, let me be careful about that, because I have to undo what I just said. The size is independent of the path, the cost is not. The cost really does depend on the path. So it's very important for me to correct what I just said. The size is independent of how I got it, because the size is the size regardless of how I get it. The cost really does depend on what I do. That's the whole point of optimizer, to find a low-cost plan. So the size is going to be independent of how I get it, but the cost really does depend on how I do it. The cost is not independent of the path that I use to get it. So we have select attribute list from a relation list where a whole bunch of terms are true. Suppose that that's one of our query blocks that's sitting there. Basically, the total number of tuples you can get is the Cartesian product of the sizes of the tables that are in the relation list. But fortunately, we've got the where clause, which allows us to reduce things by a whole lot. The reduction factor that you have for each term is the impact that it has in reducing the size. So in the stupid assumption that we're making, we're going to assume uniformity, we're going to assume independence. Uniformity means that each of the rating values, if there are 10 values, each of them is going to give us 1/10. We're going to relax that soon. And the independent says that, for example, if we're looking for the ratings and we're looking for the sailors' ages, we'll assume that if we're looking for ages that are greater than 50 and for ratings that are greater than that are equal to 8, we'll assume that the ratings 8 are going to be 1/10 of the tuples. We'll assume that assuming that there are 100 ages between 0 and 99, what the heck? That if we're looking for things that are greater than 50, then it's going to be, it's going to be 49. There are 49 values greater than 50. 49 1/100ths of the value is going to be true, and so it's going to be 49 1/100th for the values greater than 50. It's going to be 1/10 for rating equal 8. So we're going to take the product of the RF. So again, two interesting assumptions: uniformity. Every rating has the same number of sailors approximately, which is what you do when you don't know any better, because what else could you do? And independence, which is that, again, we're not going to assume that older people have higher ratings or things like that. We'll assume that they're independent. And the multi-relation plans are done by joining one new relation at the time. And basically, what you can do is the cost of getting ABC. Now you're going to be using a join method to combine E. You know the size of ABC. You know the size, or you have an estimate for the size. Again, these are all estimates. So when I say you know the size, it's all funny cost estimates. We have ABC, we have E, we have picked a join method. We know what the cost of the join method is based on our estimates of the size of the relations. We know the access path that we're using to be able to do it, and that allows us to both compute the cost of getting ABCE as well as the size of ABCE. So that's the idea. And let's see how this works with a very simple two-stage example. So let me explain what the thing on the top means. On the right, we have a query. Okay, where we're saying we're selecting sailor names where the boat reserved is boat number 100. We'll assume there are 100 boats. And the sailor rating is greater than 5. We'll assume that there are 10 ratings. Okay, and the SIDs match, and all we want to get is the sailor's name. And what you have on the left of that isn't the plan, it's which access paths exist on each table. For reserves, we'll assume that there's a B plus tree on boat ID. Is that the only access path I can use for reserves? How many think that's the only access path? That's the only index I have. So is that the only access path I can use to get to reserves? How many say yes? How many say no? And no is right, because I can always use file scan. And I've got the B plus tree on rating, on rating attribute of sailors. I've also got a hash index on SID, which means, again, that I have 3 ways that I can get to sailors. I can use the B plus tree on rating, I can use the hash on SID, I can use file scan. And as I've told you, but it doesn't show up on the slide, I can also do index intersection, RID intersection, on using both the B tree on rating and the hash on SID if I wanted to. So even though it's not a multi-column thing, I can take the intersection of those if I have the right predicates going on. Now let's see what happens at stage 1. At stage 1, you look at all the plans that you have to be able to access a first relation. What's the first relation? Well, either relation could be the first relation. Sailors could be the first relation, or ratings could be the first relation. And then we'll add the other one. That's going to be stage 2. But we're going to find the best plan, possibly interesting plans too, for each one of the tables. So first of all, let's see if sailors is the table that we access in stage 1. Well, the B plus tree does match the rating, right? We have a B plus tree on rating, and we have a predicate rating greater than 5. So the B plus tree is something that we could use to get things with rating greater than 5. So that's terrific. But if the index isn't clustered, it's not going to help me that much if there are a lot of tuples and I have to go ping, 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 ping with an unclustered index. That's not going to help me a lot. If we're clustered, usually you don't have a clustering on rating, but you might. If you have a clustered index, that might be cool. With an unclustered index, it's not going to be great. So in this case, maybe file scan is going to be better than using the B plus tree to be able to get sailors. And the B plus tree, even though it's expensive, it might be interesting, but it isn't. There's nothing that makes that interesting. There's nothing about having an ordering based on rating that would help me process the query. It's not a join, it's not a column, it's not a join column. There's no join column predicate on rating. So again, we'll probably start off and just keep the file scan on sailors as being the best, which looks at all the pages of sailors. Now, for reserves, again, there are two different things that we can consider. One is to go ahead and use the B tree on BID, and the other is to use a file scan. The B tree on BID matches the predicate BID equals 100, and so that's probably going to end up being the cheapest of the plans. We can estimate what it is based on whether or not the thing is clustered or unclustered, but let's say the thing on BID, which is going to give us 1/100th of the tuples, may end up being the cheapest. Certainly will be the best if it's clustered. Might be if it's unclustered. By the way, here's a gimmick that we haven't talked about so far. What I could do is, and this is extra work, in the B tree, I could keep the tuples that correspond to BID equals 100 sorted by the page ID. We didn't talk about doing that. It is something you could choose to do. Let me say that one again. It is a gimmick, you don't have to do it, but it's something to consider. There are going to be a whole bunch of different things, 100 and an RID, 100 and an RID. You know, however many thousand things there are that correspond with reservations with bud ID 100. You could just put the things in there in arbitrary order. That's going to make the insert and delete easy. Or you could go ahead and keep them ordered by page ID order. It may not be worth it, but if you did that, then you wouldn't have to sort by page ID because you'd be getting things in sorted order automatically. So again, 3 ways of doing things. Just put them in and don't worry about it and access them in order. Put them in, don't worry about it, and then sort by page ID before you retrieve the tuples, which means you only touch each page once, but you do have to sort all the values that have all the RIDs for the BID 100. Or keep the things sorted by the page ID, which is not really used. As far as I know, nobody bothers doing that. You don't want to do the work when you have the insert and delete. So I'm just talking about a possible plan that might be rejected, but think about alternative plans. Everybody does when they build optimizers, and something ends up being better. As hardware changes, as algorithms change, as access paths change, things that were common knowledge that everybody used no longer are true. That again applies with large main memories now as well. So a lot of the things talking about here, the ideas are good. The estimates, again, with large main memories aren't no longer true. Anyway, so for sailors, we kept one plan, which was the file scan. For reserves, we kept one plan, which was accessing based on the B plus tree on BID. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take each one of the plans that we had for a single table, and we'll throw in one of the other tables. Well, there are only 2 tables in this query. Sailors and reserves. By the way, if it were sailors joined with sailors, that would be a separate table, right? If you have multiple instances, they count as being separate. But here, if I have reserves as the outer table, that's stage 1. That's the first table I access in my left deep tree. If I have reserves as the outer, now what I can do is I have a predicate on SID. Now, my index on SID, my hash index on sailors, didn't help me when sailors was the outer. Didn't help me. But if I have a reserves table, I have, again, my hands around the neck of a reserves tuple. My index on sailors, my hash on SID of sailors helps me because I can use that hash index because I have an SID tuple from reserves. I know which SID I'm looking for inside sailors. The join predicate allows me to say, I only want to be able to get a sailor that has that matching SID. It's as if it was a constant. For each reserves tuple, I have a constant value of SID that I can use to be able to get the matching sailor. So now I can go ahead and I can use that to be able to get the sailors tuple that matches that. So that's the general idea of what's going on.